The first time a rich man looked at me like I mattered. I was holding a tray of champagne at my brother's wedding, dressed like hotel staff while my family smiled for photos without me. Then the bride's father stared at my face, went pale, and asked me if I knew who my real mother was. I almost laughed because I thought he had made a mistake. People like him didn't ask questions like that about girls like me. My name was Brianna Patterson then. At least, that was the name I was allowed to use. I was 23 years old, and I had spent my whole life inside a house where everyone had a place except me. My brother Brandon had the upstairs corner bedroom with the big windows, the king-sized bed, the flat-screen TV, the new sneakers, the private school education, the car keys, and the kind of parents who smiled when he walked into a room. I had the basement. Not a finished basement either. Not one of those nice ones with a sofa and a little bar and framed sports jerseys on the wall. Mine had a concrete floor, a furnace that kicked on so loud it shook the pipes, a thin mattress, and one cracked mirror over the utility sink. When people came over, I was told to stay downstairs unless someone needed something. When I did come up, it was usually because coffee had to be made, laundry had to be moved, or dishes had to be cleared before guests noticed. The Patterson house sat in Fairfield County, Connecticut, on a street where the lawns looked fake and every mailbox probably cost more than anything I owned. From the curb, it looked perfect. White columns, black shutters, flower beds Donna paid someone else to plant, but made me weed every Saturday morning. Inside, it was polished enough to impress people who cared about that kind of thing. There was a marble kitchen island Gerald liked to mention whenever anyone complimented the house, and I knew every little gray vein in that stone because I wiped it down until my wrists hurt. I woke up at 5 a.m. every morning without needing the alarm most days. Eggs, coffee, counters, floors, towels, Brandon's clothes, Gerald's shirts, Donna's errands. That was my schedule before most people on our street had even opened their eyes. Gerald and Donna were supposed to be my parents, but I wasn't allowed to call them that. Not after I was little. Gerald had rules written on an index card and taped to the inside of my basement door, which sounds ridiculous when I say it now. But when you grow up with something, it doesn't feel ridiculous. It just feels like the air in the room. Rule 1, I did not sit at the family table. Rule 2, I called them Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. Rule 3, I did not leave the house without permission. Rule 4, I did not speak to strangers. Donna used to say the rules were for my own good because I was different and not ready for the real world. Gerald said it more plainly one night when I was old enough to understand the threat under his voice. He told me that without papers, I didn't exist, and people who didn't exist did not get rescued. That was the part I didn't talk about for years because it made me sound stupid. I didn't have a birth certificate. I didn't have a social security card. I didn't have a school ID, a driver's license, a passport, nothing. When I asked Donna why Brandon got to go to school and I had to stay home, she said my documents had been lost and replacing them would be too complicated. I believed her because I was a kid, and because when you are trapped inside one version of the world, you start thinking that version is normal. Brandon went to St. Thomas Academy, played lacrosse, talked about college applications, and complained when Gerald bought him the wrong model of BMW for his 18th birthday. I learned to read from old magazines Donna threw away. I learned math by counting grocery change and making sure I never came home short. Brandon was not loud cruel the way Gerald was. That almost made it worse in some ways, because he could tell himself he wasn't part of it. He never had to shout at me. He just said my name like he was calling a device. Brianna, coffee. Brianna, my room. Brianna, I need this shirt washed before tonight. When his friends came over, he introduced me as the housekeeper, and nobody blinked because I was carrying a laundry basket or wiping down a counter when he said it. I used to wait for him to correct himself. I used to think maybe one day he would laugh and say, "No, I'm kidding, she's my sister." He never did. After a while, I stopped waiting. The worst part was that I helped them keep the lie looking clean. I knew which china Gerald wanted when business people came over. I knew how Donna liked the guest towels folded. I knew Brandon's favorite breakfast, the way he liked his coffee, the way his lacrosse uniform had to be washed separately so the white stayed bright. I knew the Patterson family better than anybody, and somehow I was still not in it. Once, when I was 14, I asked Donna if I could sit with them for dinner, just that one time. She looked at me like I had asked to take her wedding ring. Then she smiled in that sweet, tight way she used when she wanted to sound kind and said, "Brianna, honey, the table only seats 3. The table seated 6. I had cleaned under every chair. I think that was the first time something in me understood the truth, even if I didn't have the courage to say it. I was not being forgotten by accident. I was being placed. They had built a life where Brandon was the son, Gerald was the provider, Donna was the elegant mother, and I was the useful girl in the background who made everything easier. The strange thing is, I still tried to be good. I still told myself, maybe if I caused less trouble, they would be warmer. Maybe if I worked harder, Donna would one day introduce me properly. Maybe if I stayed quiet long enough, the house would somehow make room for me. That was the lie I lived on, because the truth was too ugly to hold every day. Then Brandon got engaged to Victoria Whitmore, and suddenly the whole house changed temperature. Victoria was pretty in that polished old money way. Blonde hair, calm voice, careful manners, and a ring so bright Donna kept finding excuses to hold her hand. Her father was Richard Whitmore, the kind of man Gerald talked about like he was a locked door Gerald had finally found the key to. The wedding was going to be at the Ritz-Carlton in White Plains. 200 guests, live orchestra, 5-tier cake, and more flowers than I had seen in my entire life. For 6 months, I addressed envelopes, organized RSVP cards, picked up dry cleaning, steamed linens, and listened to Donna say this wedding had to be perfect because the Whitmores were not the kind of people you disappoint. I thought, in a quiet, embarrassing way, that maybe I would be included. Not in a big role, I wasn't that foolish, but maybe a dress, maybe a seat near the back, maybe one photo where I stood near Brandon and looked like someone who belonged to the same life. 3 weeks before the wedding, Donna called me into the kitchen and said we needed to discuss my role. I remember drying my hands on a dish towel and feeling my heart lift, which still makes me uncomfortable to admit. Then she told me I would be helping with service, passing champagne, making sure guests had what they needed. She said it like she was giving me something nice. When I asked if she meant I would be working my own brother's wedding, her face tightened and she said, "Don't make this about you. You're better in the background." That line stayed in my head for days. Better in the background. Not shy, not helpful, not family. Background. The rehearsal dinner proved exactly what she meant. Donna put me in a black dress and a white apron, adjusted my collar like she was arranging a napkin, and told me to smile but not speak unless someone spoke first. The dinner was at the Greenwich Country Club, out on the terrace with white tablecloths and glasses so thin I was afraid to hold them. I moved between Victoria's relatives with a silver tray in my hands, while Gerald laughed too loudly near the bar, and Brandon wrapped his arm around his future. I was almost invisible, which was what Donna wanted. Then Victoria stopped me near the railing and asked, "You're Brandon's sister, right?" I almost dropped the tray. Before I could answer like a normal person, Donna appeared beside me so fast it felt like she had been waiting for the question. She laughed and said I preferred to help because I had always been shy. Her hand landed on my arm, light enough for people to read as affection, firm enough for me to understand it as a warning. Victoria looked confused, but she let it go. I went back to carrying champagne, trying not to look embarrassed, trying not to look like a grown woman who had just been corrected in front of strangers. That was when I noticed Richard Whitmore for the first time. He stood near the terrace railing with a drink in his hand, but he wasn't drinking. He was staring at me like my face had interrupted him. Then he walked over, asked my name, and after I said Brianna, he went very still. He asked me if I knew who my real mother was, and I just stood there with that stupid tray balanced on my palm, trying to decide whether I had heard him wrong. No one had ever asked me anything like that. People asked me where the bathroom was, whether there were more napkins, whether I could take a plate away. They did not ask questions that made the floor feel uneven under my shoes. I told him Mrs. Patterson had raised me since I was a baby, because that was the safest answer I knew how to give. Richard kept looking at my face, not in a rude way, not like he was judging me, but like he was trying to match me to something he had carried in his mind for a long time. Then he apologized and walked away fast, already pulling his phone out. I watched him cross the terrace and disappear toward the parking area, his shoulders tight. When I turned back, Donna was looking at me from across the crowd with a smile that did not reach any part of her face. Gerald was beside her, and for once, he was not pretending to be relaxed. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes moved from Richard to me and back again, like he was trying to solve a problem before anyone else noticed there was one. That should have told me more than it did, but I had spent my life explaining away strange things, because explaining them away hurt less. That night, I went back to the basement with the black dress folded over my arm and the apron Donna had already told me to wear the next day. Upstairs, the house was loud with Brandon's friends and Donna's sisters, people laughing, bottles opening, shoes crossing the hardwood floors I had polished that morning. Downstairs, I sat on my mattress and held the only family photograph I had ever taken from a drawer before Donna threw it out. I was 5 in it, standing near the edge of the frame by the Christmas tree, while Gerald, Donna, and Brandon sat together, like a real family, in the center. I wasn't touching anyone. I looked like I had wandered into the picture by mistake, and for the first time in years, I let myself ask the question I usually push down. Why didn't they have any pictures of me as a baby? The next morning, I woke up at 4 a.m. because wedding days, apparently, required even more invisible work. I made Eggs Benedict because Gerald liked to feel important before important events, squeezed orange juice until my hands stung, and set the dining room with the good china. Donna came downstairs in a silk robe with her hair in rollers and inspected everything like a hotel manager. She told me the hollandaise looked thin, then told me to hurry because Victoria's gown still needed steaming. The dress was hanging in the guest room in a white garment bag, $12,000 of lace and beading that I was trusted to protect, but not trusted to stand near once the photograph started. I steamed the gown with both hands shaking. Donna stood in the doorway and reminded me not to touch the beadwork because, according to her, one piece of imported crystal was worth more than I was. She said it casually, like a little joke, but neither of us laughed. Then she gave me the rules for the hotel. I was to enter through the service entrance, keep my head down, stay away from the family tables unless I was serving, and absolutely not talk to Richard Whitmore if he tried to ask me anything else. When Gerald shouted from downstairs asking where his coffee was, Donna looked at me and said, "Remember what you are today." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I already knew. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom looked unreal when I came in through the loading dock. It was all chandeliers and white roses and gold chairs lined up in perfect rows, the kind of room Donna had been dreaming herself into for months. Guests came in wearing gowns, tuxedos, watches, diamonds, and the sort of confidence people have when every door in life has opened for them. I carried champagne from table to table and lied when a woman asked if I worked for the hotel. I said yes because it was easier than explaining that the groom was my brother, and my family had decided I should look like staff. A few minutes later, Brandon saw me and waved me over like he was calling someone across a restaurant. He was smiling, relaxed, handsome in his tuxedo. Exactly the son Gerald and Donna wanted everyone to see. He told me to make sure there was extra shrimp at his table because Dad would complain if they ran out. One of his groomsmen looked at me and asked who I was. Brandon didn't even pause. "Housekeeper," he said. "She's been with us forever." I felt my face go hot, but the worst part was how easy it sounded coming out of his mouth. Not mean, not nervous, not ashamed, just normal. The ceremony started at 4 p.m., and I stood at the back with a tray in my hands while Donna cried in the front row like she had raised the perfect son. Brandon's voice cracked during his vows, and everyone smiled at how sweet it was. I remember staring at the back of his tuxedo and wondering how a person could sound so tender in public and be so blind in private. Victoria looked beautiful, and for a second I almost felt bad for her because she had no idea what she was marrying into. Then the room applauded, and rose petals went everywhere, and I bent down afterward to pick up some that had fallen near the aisle because that was what I had been trained to do. Even during someone else's love story, I was cleaning up. After the ceremony, the photographer started calling for family portraits by the floral arch. The Whitmores gathered first, all calm and coordinated, with Richard standing slightly apart like his mind was somewhere else. Then Gerald, Donna, and Brandon moved into place with Victoria, and I stayed back with my tray, the way I always did. The photographer glanced around, pointed at me, and said, "What about her? Is she family?" The silence that followed was small, maybe 2 seconds, but it felt longer than anything that had happened that day. Gerald smiled without showing his teeth. Donna looked down. Brandon suddenly became very interested in fixing his cuff. Then Richard spoke. His voice was calm, but it cut through the room cleanly. "Yes," he said, "she's family. Brianna, come stand beside me." I froze so completely the tray tilted in my hand. Gerald's face changed first. A quick flash of anger he covered too late. Donna's mouth opened like she wanted to correct him, but she didn't dare, not in front of the man paying for the wedding. I set the tray down and walked into the picture, feeling every eye on me, feeling my own body resist it because I had been trained not to take up space. Richard put one hand lightly on my shoulder and said, low enough that only I heard it, "Right here, don't move." The flash went off, and for the first time in my life, I was in a family photograph because someone outside my family had to force the issue. The photographer showed Richard the preview, and he zoomed in on my face. His expression broke in a way I did not understand yet. He whispered something about my eyes and my chin, then walked away with his phone already pressed to his ear. I only caught pieces of what he said, but the words I heard made my stomach turn cold. "Get the old file," he said, "the hospital case. And I need a DNA kit, tonight." Gerald grabbed my arm before I could even breathe. He pulled me through a service hallway so hard my shoes slipped once on the tile, and when we reached a narrow space stacked with champagne crates, he shoved me against the wall. His face was close to mine, red and tight, and his voice came out low enough that no guest would hear. "What did you tell him?" I said nothing, because I had told Richard nothing, but Gerald did not believe me. Donna came in behind him, pale under her makeup, and said my name like it tasted bad in her mouth. She told me I was not to speak to Richard again, not tonight, not ever. And then Gerald leaned closer and said, "Without us, you are nobody. Do not forget that." I went back into that ballroom with Gerald's fingerprints still sore around my arm and a tray in my hands like nothing had happened. That was the part people never understand when they ask why I didn't scream or run or make a scene. I had spent 23 years being taught that scenes were dangerous for me and convenient for them. So I smiled at strangers, picked up empty glasses, and watched Gerald and Donna laugh at the family table, like they had not just cornered me in a hallway and reminded me I had no legal proof I existed. Richard found me near the edge of the ballroom about 20 minutes later. I saw him coming before he spoke, and my whole body tightened because Donna was watching from across the room. She had one hand wrapped around her champagne glass, smiling at whoever sat beside her, but her eyes stayed on me. Richard stopped a careful distance away, like he could tell I was scared. He asked if he could speak with me privately for 1 minute, and I said I probably shouldn't. My voice came out so small I hated hearing it. He lowered his own voice and said, "Brianna, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." I followed him out to the terrace because some part of me, a very small part, wanted someone to keep asking. The night air hit my face, cool and clean after the perfume and flowers inside. Richard took an old photograph from inside his jacket and held it out with both hands, like it was fragile. In the picture, a young woman with dark chestnut hair held a baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The woman looked tired but happy, and she had green eyes. Not just green like mine were green, but the exact strange shade I had spent my life being told not to ask about. He told me the woman was his sister, Margaret Whitmore. Then he told me the baby's name was Brianna Ashford Whitmore, and my stomach dropped in a way I still cannot explain without sounding dramatic. The name sounded close enough to mine to scare me, but also too far away to belong to me. Richard said that 23 years earlier, Margaret's baby had been taken from a hospital nursery in California when she was 6 months old. The case had been investigated for years. The FBI had a file. Margaret had hired private investigators, followed bad leads, and refused to accept that her daughter was gone. Richard's voice shook when he said his sister died 5 years later, still waiting for someone to bring her child home. I remember looking back through the glass doors at the reception. Donna was scanning the room, probably looking for me. Brandon and Victoria were dancing in the center of the floor, laughing like everything in the world had lined up for them exactly right. I stood outside with a man I barely knew, holding a photograph of a woman who looked more like me than anyone in the house where I had grown up. I told Richard he had to be mistaken, because that was the only sentence my brain could build. He nodded like he expected that. Then he said, "Maybe I am. That's why I need proof." The DNA kit was in a small plastic container, plain and ordinary, which made the whole thing feel even stranger. I asked what would happen if the test matched, and Richard took a second before answering. He said if it matched, I was Margaret's daughter, his niece, and legally the missing child from that old case. He also told me Margaret had created a trust in her daughter's name before she died, just in case she was ever found. When I asked how much, I almost wished I hadn't. Richard said it was a little over $12 million now. I didn't feel rich when he said it. I felt sick, because if he was right, then every day of my life had been built on something Gerald and Donna had no right to touch. I let him take the sample. I wish I could say I was brave about it, but I wasn't. My hands shook so badly, Richard had to tell me twice that I could sit down. When it was done, he gave me his number on a folded piece of hotel stationery and told me not to confront the Pattersons, not yet. He said people who had kept a secret that long would panic if they thought it was slipping away. That scared me because Gerald already looked panicked, and Gerald panicked like a man who punished the closest person with less power than him. The next 3 days were awful in a quiet way. Nothing outside changed. I still woke up at 5 a.m., still made Gerald's coffee, still cleaned the same counters and folded the same laundry. But everything had a second meaning now. When Donna told me to stop dragging my feet, I wondered if she had known from the beginning. When Gerald complained that I had burned the toast, I looked at his face and wondered if he remembered the first time he saw me. Not as a daughter, as something he had acquired. That thought made me feel cold all day. On the third night, my old phone buzzed under my mattress. It was a text from Richard, saying the results were in and asking me to meet him at a cafe on Main Street at 10 a.m. I barely slept after that. In the morning, I told Donna we were low on cleaning supplies, and she waved me off without looking up from her magazine. I walked to the cafe with my heart hitting so hard I thought people passing me could hear it. Richard was sitting at a corner table when I came in, and there was a manila envelope in front of him. His eyes were red, like he had already read the papers and had not known what to do with the grief. He slid the envelope across the table. I opened it slowly because some part of me still wanted the answer to be no, just so my life could stay terrible in a way I understood. The report had numbers, charts, words I didn't know, and one highlighted line I could understand perfectly. The probability was 99.97%. The tested individual, Brianna Patterson, was the biological daughter of Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. I read it again because my brain refused to hold it. Then Richard said, very quietly, "You're Brianna Ashford Whitmore. You're my niece." For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. I wasn't relieved yet. I wasn't happy. I was sitting in a cafe, staring at a piece of paper that proved the people who raised me had lied about almost everything that mattered. Richard reached across the table and put his hand over mine, but he did not squeeze too hard. He told me the FBI had already been contacted, the old case was being reopened, and Gerald and Donna would have to answer for how they got me. I kept looking at the report, at that new name, at the word biological. And the thing that finally broke me was not the money or the charges or even the kidnapping. It was the fact that somewhere, once, I had belonged to a woman who wanted me. The hardest thing after that was going back to the Patterson house and pretending I did not know. Richard told me not to go back alone, but I didn't know how to leave without making Gerald suspicious, and I was still learning that I was allowed to choose safety over obedience. That sounds simple now, but it was not simple then. I had spent my whole life measuring danger by Gerald's face and Donna's tone, and even with a DNA report in Richard's hands, my body still reacted like they owned me. So I went back, put the cleaning supplies on the pantry shelf, and made lunch for Donna's guests, while the truth sat folded in my mind like something hot enough to burn through my skin. Gerald noticed something was off before Donna did. He always noticed fear, probably because he knew how to make it. At dinner that night, he watched me from the head of the table while Brandon's empty chair sat beside him because Brandon and Victoria were still on their honeymoon. Donna talked about the wedding photos, about which ones she wanted enlarged, about how beautiful she looked under the chandeliers. Then Gerald said, without looking away from me, "You were gone a long time this morning." I told him the store was busy. He set his fork down very carefully and said, "Funny, I called the house while you were out, and for once, no one answered." Donna stopped talking. I stood near the kitchen doorway with the water pitcher in my hand and felt that old basement fear crawl right up my spine. For the next week, Richard and the FBI moved faster than Gerald could guess, but inside the house, everything felt slow and dangerous. Richard called only once, and even then he spoke in short sentences. He said there would be a meeting at his estate in Greenwich, framed as a business conversation for Gerald and Brandon. He said Special Agent Morrison and another agent would be there, out of sight at first. He told me I did not have to come if I wasn't ready, but I said I wanted to be there. I didn't say why, mostly because I didn't fully know. Maybe I needed to see their faces when the story stopped belonging to them. Maybe I needed to watch Gerald realize that the girl he kept without papers had finally become a person on paper. The invitation landed exactly the way Richard knew it would. Gerald practically glowed when he told Donna that Richard Whitmore wanted to discuss opportunities after the wedding. Donna spent 2 days choosing the right outfit, a pale blue Armani suit with pearl earrings, like she was dressing for the life she thought she was about to enter. Brandon and Victoria were flying back early from Bali to attend, and Gerald kept saying this was how families like theirs became families like the Whitmores. He did not notice how quiet I was. Or maybe he did, but he mistook it for fear, which had always worked out for him before. Richard's house looked less like a house and more like a place people tour with a guide. Stone gates, a long driveway, trimmed hedges, tall windows, old paintings, rooms with ceilings so high my voice felt small before I even spoke. Gerald stepped out of the car and whispered that the property had to be worth $30 million. Donna told him not to sound impressed, then immediately smoothed her hair in the reflection of a window. I followed them inside because Donna had told me I was there to help serve if needed. Even walking into the place where my real family lived, she still tried to bring me in as labor. Richard greeted them politely. That was the part that almost made me shake. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse them at the door. He shook Gerald's hand, kissed Donna's cheek, and invited everyone into the sitting room like this was exactly the meeting Gerald had been dreaming about. I stood near the doorway, and Richard's eyes met mine for half a second. Not long enough for Gerald to notice, long enough for me to breathe. In the next room, through a gap in the doorway, I saw a man in a gray suit standing still with his hands folded in front of him. Beside him, a woman sat with a folder on her lap. Special Agent Morrison and Agent Chen were already there. Donna accepted tea from the Whitmore housekeeper like she had been born to be served in rooms like that. She crossed her ankles, thanked Richard for having them, and complimented the house in a voice she probably practiced in the car. Gerald leaned forward, eager, asking about Brandon's future, about real estate, about how grateful they all were to be connected to the Whitmore family now. Richard let him talk for a minute. Then he looked toward me and said, "Before Brandon gets here, I'd like to discuss Brianna." The change in Gerald was small but immediate. His smile froze first, then his hand tightened around the cup. Donna blinked too fast and said, "Brianna? What about her?" Richard asked how long I had been with them. Donna answered quickly, too quickly, saying they had adopted me as a baby and given me everything they could. She said I had always been shy, always difficult, but they had done their best. I stood by the doorway, listening to her talk about my life like she was polishing silver. Richard nodded once, then opened the leather folder on the table beside him. He said his attorneys had searched county and state records and found no adoption papers. No birth certificate connected to the Patterson family. No social security record. No legal trace of me as their child. Gerald laughed once, a dry little sound that did not hold. He said records get lost all the time. Richard placed the DNA report on the coffee table first. Then he placed the old FBI file beside it. He did it slowly, like he wanted them to have time to understand what was happening before he said the words. He told them the report confirmed I was the biological daughter of Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. He told them the FBI file was from the March 2003 abduction of Brianna Ashford Whitmore from Stanford Hospital. Donna's cup slipped out of her hand and broke on the rug. Gerald stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor, and for the first time in my life, I saw him with no role to hide inside. Not father, not provider, not respectable man, just someone caught. The door to the next room opened, and Special Agent Morrison stepped in, with Agent Chen behind him. He introduced himself, showed his badge, and said they had questions about how Gerald and Donna Patterson acquired the child they had called their daughter. Donna started crying before anyone touched her. Gerald tried to talk over everyone, saying this was a misunderstanding, saying Richard was insane, saying I had always been unstable. That last part almost made me laugh, but nothing came out. Agent Morrison told them they were under arrest on suspicion of human trafficking, document fraud, and child endangerment. When the handcuffs clicked around Gerald's wrists, he looked at me like I had betrayed him. That was the moment I understood how sick the whole thing had been. In his mind, even my freedom was something I had taken from him. Brandon and Victoria walked in less than 10 minutes after the handcuffs came out, still carrying that honeymoon brightness on their faces. Victoria had sunglasses pushed up in her hair, and Brandon had one arm around her waist like he was arriving at the next beautiful part of his life. Then he saw Gerald against the wall with an agent beside him, Donna crying into her hands, and me standing near Richard with the DNA report on the table. His face changed in pieces. First confusion, then irritation, then something like fear when he realized nobody in that room was treating him like the person who mattered most. Victoria was the first one to ask what happened. Richard answered her carefully, not cruelly, but he did not soften the facts to protect Brandon. He said I was not Gerald and Donna's adopted daughter, that there were no records, that the DNA test confirmed I was his missing niece, and that the FBI believed the Pattersons had obtained me illegally when I was a baby. Victoria stared at Brandon, waiting for him to say he knew nothing, waiting for him to look shocked in the right way. Brandon just kept looking at me, like I was the one who had brought something dirty into his marriage. He said, "Brianna, what did you do?" And I think that hurt more than I expected, because even then, with federal agents in the room and his parents in handcuffs, his first instinct was to blame the girl who had washed his sheets. I told him I didn't do anything except find out my name. My voice shook, but I did not take it back. Donna cried harder and said she had loved me in her own way, which was such an ugly sentence I almost couldn't stand hearing it. Gerald told her to shut up, then told the agents this was all Richard's attempt to ruin him. Nobody moved to comfort him. Nobody asked his side like he expected them to. For the first time, Gerald Patterson was in a room where his expensive watch, his voice, his suit, and his confidence could not make people obey him. He looked smaller without control. The charges came down within weeks, and the story hit the local news faster than I was ready for. Fairfield County loved a scandal when it happened behind nice shutters and trimmed hedges. Reporters parked outside the old Patterson house. Former neighbors gave interviews saying they always thought our family was private, which was a polite way of saying they had seen strange things and decided they were not their problem. The investigation uncovered records from an underground adoption network that had been shut down years earlier. My name was not written like a daughter's name in those papers. It was listed next to a cash amount and a delivery date, like I was furniture someone had paid to have brought to the house. The trial lasted months, and I testified twice. I thought I would be more dramatic on the stand, maybe angry, maybe strong in a way people would notice. Mostly, I was tired. I answered questions about the basement, the rules, the lack of school, the missing documents, the time I tried to leave and got brought back because I had no ID. Gerald's lawyer tried to make it sound like I had misunderstood a strict but loving household. When he asked if it was true the Pattersons fed me and gave me shelter, I looked at the jury and said, "They gave me a mattress on concrete and called it a home." The courtroom went very quiet after that. Donna turned on Gerald during her testimony. She said she had been scared of him, that he had made the decisions, that she had always wanted to be kinder to me. I watched her dab her eyes with a tissue and remembered her standing in the doorway while I steamed Victoria's wedding dress, telling me one piece of beadwork was worth more than I was. Gerald did not protect her either. He snapped in court that Donna knew exactly what they had done and had enjoyed having me around because I was cheaper than hired help. That was the first honest thing I ever heard him say, and it came out only because he was trying to save himself. Gerald was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Donna got 12. Their assets were frozen, and the Fairfield house was tied up in civil claims and restitution. The same house where I had been told not to sit at the table became a piece of evidence, a property file, a place strangers walked through taking photographs of the basement. Brandon lost his job at Whitmore Properties almost immediately. Victoria filed for divorce 3 weeks later, and from what I heard, she refused to take a single call from Donna. I did not feel happy about all of it in the way people might expect. I felt like I had been holding my breath for 23 years, And now that the air was finally there, I didn't know how to use it. Brandon called me 6 months after sentencing. I almost let it ring out, but I answered because some old part of me still reacted when a Patterson wanted something. He sounded awful, thin and desperate, and for a moment I felt the old reflex to fix whatever was wrong. Then he asked for money. Not an apology first, not a real one anyway, just a shaky explanation about debt, the divorce, the wedding expenses, the car being gone, the apartment being gone, nobody wanting to hire him because of the news. He said, just until I get back on my feet, like we were siblings who had once helped each other through hard times. I asked him if he had ever once helped me. He went quiet. I asked if he had ever asked why I slept in the basement, why I never went to school, why his friends were allowed to call me the housekeeper. He said he didn't know what to say. That was probably the most honest he had ever been with me, too. I told him I was not going to give him money, and not because I wanted revenge. I told him that all those years he had benefited from pretending not to see me, and now he was going to have to learn what life felt like without someone invisible cleaning up after him. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but I did not call him back. The trust became active 3 months after the trial ended. Richard's attorneys handled the paperwork, court orders, identity verification, FBI confirmation, all of it. The final document listed me as Brianna Ashford Whitmore, beneficiary of a trust my mother had created before she died. The amount was over $12 million, but the number did not hit me the way the name did. Brianna Ashford Whitmore. Not housekeeper, not difficult girl, not background. A person with a name that had been waiting for her longer than anyone in the Patterson house ever had. Richard brought me to the bank himself when the trust was released, and I remember feeling embarrassed because I did not know how to sit in a room like that. The banker kept explaining investment options, tax planning, protected accounts, long-term growth, all these phrases that sounded like they belonged to someone with a different childhood. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, wearing one of the first dresses I had ever chosen for myself, and all I could think about was how Gerald used to make me count grocery change twice before he let me leave the store. The money mattered, of course it did, but it was not the first thing that made me cry. What made me cry was signing my real name on the final paperwork and watching the banker accept it like it had always been mine. I moved into a guest suite at Richard's house for a while, and the first night there was harder than I expected. The room had windows that looked over a rose garden, a bed with clean white sheets, a desk, a soft rug, and a bathroom I did not have to ask permission to use. I walked around touching things like I was afraid they would disappear if I stopped checking. Richard's wife, Eleanor, left towels folded on the bed and asked if I needed anything, and I almost said no because needing things still felt dangerous. Later, when everyone was asleep, I sat on the floor beside the bed instead of getting in it. A real bed felt too big for me at first, which is a sad thing to admit, but it was true. I did visit Gerald and Donna once after sentencing. Richard did not think it was a good idea, and honestly, he was probably right. But I needed to see them without the house around them. I needed to see what was left when Gerald did not have the head of the table, the locked doors, the pantry, the rules, or my missing papers to hide behind. The visiting room was cold and plain, with metal chairs and fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. Gerald came in first, in prison clothes that hung loose on him, and Donna came after him, looking older than 12 months should have made her. She started crying as soon as she saw me and said, "You came," like my presence meant forgiveness was about to happen. I told them I was not there to forgive them. I said I was there because for 23 years they had trained me to be quiet, and I wanted them to hear me clearly one time. Gerald stared at me with that same old contempt, but it did not reach me the way it used to. I told him I was not born to serve him, not born to clean his house, not born to sleep under his furnace, not born to make Brandon's life easier. Donna kept saying they had saved me, and I looked at her and said, "You saved yourself money on a housekeeper." She covered her face after that, but I did not feel cruel. I felt accurate. Before I left, Gerald said I would always be ungrateful. That was the last thing he ever said to me in person, and I am glad, in a strange way, because it proved he had learned nothing. I stood up and told him he could believe whatever made prison easier for him, but I was done living inside his version of me. Then I walked out. I did not turn around in the hallway, not even when Donna started sobbing behind me. For years, I had looked back every time one of them called my name because my body thought obedience was survival. That day, I kept walking. A year later, I got into Yale through a program for survivors rebuilding their education. I had tutors before that, a lot of them, and I had to learn things most people learn when they are 12 or 15 or 17. It was humiliating sometimes. I would sit at a table with worksheets and feel 23 years old and 6 years old at the same time. But nobody laughed at me for not knowing. Nobody called me stupid. Nobody told me I was better in the background. They just taught me, and slowly I started to believe I could learn without paying for it with fear. I keep 2 things on my nightstand now. One is my new birth certificate with my real name on it, Brianna Ashford Whitmore, daughter of Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. The other is a letter Richard found in my mother's old papers, written before she knew I had been taken. She wrote that I was loved, that I was wanted, that I was enough. I have read those words so many times the paper is starting to soften at the folds. Some mornings, I still wake up at 5 a.m. before my alarm. But now I get up, make coffee, open my psychology textbook, and sit at my own desk in my own room with my name on the door. I used to think freedom would feel loud. I thought it would feel like a courtroom, an arrest, a giant number in a bank account, or someone finally saying the Pattersons were wrong. Some of it did feel like that. But most days it is quieter. It is choosing what I eat. It is closing my door without fear. It is saying no and not explaining myself until my throat hurts. It is looking at a family photo now and not standing at the edge of the frame. If you stayed with me this long, thank you. If this story reminded you of someone who was treated like help instead of family, or someone who was trained to accept less than basic respect, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear stories like this. And tell me in the comments, when do you think silence becomes part of the harm? What would you have done if you were in Victoria's position? And do you think Brandon deserved help after everything he ignored?